jolly good. Finally back at the cinema, yeah, thank God I went to the cinema today. I feel like I'm at home, even though I wish I lived in the cinema. But that is impossible. But the cinema is back, including eating inside the restaurant and the pub ? And the cinemas are open. Yeah! Oh, it's so good to be back. Really is. Hello, boys and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Clank Zoka. Welcome to another of my thoughts song. Today I'll be talking about the first film I watched yesterday that I saw at the light, and that is Peter Rabbit 2, or Peter Rabbit 2 The Runaway, but Peter Rabbit 2 sounds just fine. So, yeah. So, if you've seen my thoughts on for the first film, I even did a review for the first film, back when I actually did reviews, you'll know that I didn't really like the first film that much. It wasn't bad, I actually can tolerate it fine, but since I actually cannot stand James Corden, and the film only seemed to rely on very silly and not very funny or clever slapstick, and also it's kind of an insult to Beatrix Potter by bringing these characters to the modern world. It just doesn't feel genuine or feels right, you know. If it was animated, and there is a sequence in the film which is fully animated, then maybe, and just keep the classic charm of Beatrix Potter's books. But no, it turned into a very moderate hip-hop, very mediocrely annoying film, but you know, visually the film looks good. I like the way it looks. There are actually some very funny moments, and I'll even admit that the emotional moments worked. Ish. I say ish because it didn't quite work entirely. And Donald Gleason is actually a real delight in the film. He's the only actor in the film that actually really tries and pulls it off quite well, and I love the score by Dominic Lewis. So it's a okay, mediocre. It's very okay, despite how mediocre and like irritating it is. If it wasn't James Corden, I think like Tom Hardy or someone more British, or someone that actually can do a good troublemaker can voice Peter Rabbit, I think this film could have been fine. But it's a perfectly watchable, okay family film. It's no Paddington, but compared to what other live-action films, I should say, that Sony botched up, it's better than Smurfs, but even I take goosebumps over this. So, we now have a sequel, which people asked for. I mean, the film, despite being a bomb, still made lots of money. I mean, is Peter Rabbit even a thing in everywhere else? I know it's popular and more well-known here, but is it, like, popular elsewhere? Because I don't quite see the popular, you know, I don't quite see how it's big in other countries. The sequel pretty much has everything coming back. Will Gluck is still the director. Sony Pictures Animation is no longer involved with the sequel, which doesn't make much of a difference anyway, since the first film... Actually, no, it's quite similar to the Angry Birds movie, where the first Angry Birds movie wasn't by Sony Pictures Animation, but then the sequel was. So, you know, it doesn't seem to change anything, really. It's just they're no longer involved. Daisy Ridley is not in the film as Cottontail. If you're wondering why, I have no sodding clue. I did do my research, and I tried. It just said she was replaced. James Corden's back. Rhodes Byrne. Pretty much the original cast, most of them do return. Some of the characters have different voice actors, which is strange, I guess, but I'm perfectly okay with that. But yeah, should we talk about Peter Rabbit 2? Yeah? Yeah, I think we should. So, if you haven't seen the first film, which, quite frankly, you're not really missing much, so in the sequel, Thomas McGregor, played once again by Donald Gleeson, gets married to Bea, played once again by Rose Byrne. They both get married, and they still own that toy shop as well. And then this publisher named Nigel Basil Jones, and he is played by David Oyelowo. Oyelowo? The guy from Selma, and he was also in he was in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. He's a pretty well known and actually quite respected British actor. I'm trying to think what else he's in that you might recognise him from. Apparently he was in A Wrinkle of Time as well. He was also in Star Wars Rebels. He also got nominated for 2 Emmys. Yeah, big British actor. He plays the publisher Nigel Basil Jones, who wants to publish Beatrix Potter's books. So Peter Rabbit exists in the world of this movie? Okay. So he wants to publish the books to expand on it. So this is one of those like films where someone wants to expand upon the books, but also there's merchandise involved. And yeah, so Peter Rabbit seems to be in trouble once again. He's always causing it, but there are times in the film where he just seems to try to help, and then Thomas is like, Peter! Also, how the hell did they know his name was Peter in the first film? They didn't really refer to him as that. They just call him Sweetie or Rat. But in the sequel, I guess because he's Peter Rabbit, I guess they already know he's Peter Rabbit, and they know who Benjamin is. It's like the continuity of these films don't make any sense at all, but at the same time I don't think it's trying to. But anyway, so Peter feels very guilty, and he decides to go for a walk, and he doesn't want to be goody-goody. He wants to, he's sick of getting told off by Thomas, and he's just going to walk away. And he comes across this local thief named Barnabas. He's voiced by Lenny James, and he seemed to know Peter's father, and so he joins him along with another team of animals. You got Samuel Whiskers, he's voiced by Rupert Degas. Even Haley Atwell voices Mittens, Tom Kitten, and I think that's it. And some of them are actually from the book. Barnabas is made exclusively for the sequel. I can confirm that Tom Kitten is from the books. I don't know if Mittens is. Samuel Whiskers, I know he is. So he joins them in just trying to steal food and actually learn how it feels to be with someone that isn't, his family. But Peter comes to a close and thinking, he should probably go back to the people he likes. But to be fair, Thomas is acting like a dick to him anyways, in a way. And Bea's just, trying to think about what she can do with the book. And then Thomas McGregor's trying to do boxing, trying to talk to Nigel about things. Okay. Alright. So, in terms of trying to adapt a story from a children's book, this film isn't really adapting anything. It's just a modernised version of Peter Rabbit. Where do I begin? First off, is it me or is there a little bit too much going on? So mainly it's Peter Rabbit being with Barnabas and learning how to steal food and actually do things right, I suppose. And then Thomas is very suspicious of Nigel for the way he's talking and seducing Bea, and Bea's just trying to do more to publish her book. Cottontail has Sugar High. Flopsy, voiced once again by Margot Robbie, changes her name to Lavatory. Don't know why. And Mopsy is there, and Benjamin just kind of talks to Peter about he's like in those sequels where one of the main characters just gets pushed aside to being just a supporting character. Benjamin's like that, and he's just there. There are characters from the first film that are just there. Picklin Bland is in it. Mr. Todd, whose voice is Scottish. So why was he British in the first film but now Scottish in the sequel? I actually do not know, and that's actually weird. Some of the characters from the first film, like minor characters, return in the sequel. They don't really do much other than like help like Peter in the third act. Where I won't give anything away, but they go to this. You see it in the trailer. They go to this like farmers market. The film is pretty much how I would have predicted it would go. There's a twist in the film which, when I saw it, I was like, oh no, it's one of those films. But on one hand, I saw this twist coming, and I won't give too much away. But let's just say it does involve what goes on, like what happens with Barnabas and the group. And yeah, knowing the character of Barnabas and his group, you kind of get the indication of what they are and what they're doing. And this film is obviously not a masterclass of twists. This twist was just like, yeah, I saw that coming. It's quite obvious. Also, there's a thing called foreshadowing. There is a little bit of foreshadowing with Nigel Basil Jones, which doesn't surprise me at all, really. He's not the villain, but I say he's more like Sterling from Cars 3, where he's just more like a an obstacle just for Thomas and B. The humour in the film is pretty much the same like the first film, but to this film's credit, it does kind of make fun of itself, which I like. I like when it makes fun of James Corden. He goes like, "Oh, is my voice annoying?" And I was just sitting in the cinema going, "Yes, you are." And they do kind of ruin it by making him scream, and I'm like, this doesn't make it funnier, you're just annoying genuinely. There were a few slapstick moments that I did laugh out loud at, and I can't believe I just said that. I mean, I laughed a little bit at the first film, but there's this one I was like, laughing kind of like every now and then. I think I've laughed 4 or 5 times, and for Mark Kermode, it's the 6th laugh test. It was almost there. Almost. There are a couple of slapstick moments that involves like CGI, like the scenes where Thomas McGregor, like you've seen it in the trailer, he rolls down the hill, and they use a GoPro camera, which I can tell by the quality. But the way he goes down even further is like he like bounces and bounces like a cartoon. I'm like, okay, this is getting a little bit strange. It gets a bit funny, but then it also gets very, very strange. The budget for this film kind of looks the same from the first film, but at the same time it looks, I don't know, the budget doesn't look as like high as the first film, which I don't think is saying much. Dramatically, this film is not quite as dramatically well done as the first film, and even in the first film, dramatically it was fine. Obviously Peter he kind of goes through what he did in the first film and just says like, I'm sorry for everything. And even in like the first film, it was kind of his fault for actually trying to intrude on Thomas. In the sequel, it's pretty much all of his fault, really, but at the same time, you could indicate that it's also everyone involved, really. But, yeah, there isn't anything I can say that's bad about the storytelling. It's just that it's very basic and nothing really surprising. Like I said, there is a twist, but the twist is so painfully obvious. And even the way they indicate it is nothing surprising. It's just, oh, that happens. But I will admit, I actually kind of enjoyed it. The third act, when they go to the farmer's market, is actually when the film actually starts to become passable. And hell, I wasn't even bored with the film. I was a little bit cringed. Only a little, but mostly I was actually kind of enjoying it, really. The slapstick was better, the humour is not great, but I laughed more than the first film. It's on the right track to actually making this. This is the same thing I had with the Angry Birds movie too, and not because Sony Pictures Animation wasn't involved with the first film. But if you remove the first film of Peter Rabbit and you make this the first film, I think this could have been passable. Same with Angry Birds movie 2. If the first film didn't exist and this was the actual first film, I think it would have been fine on its own. But unfortunately, I think the last scene in the film, there is like a mid-credit scene which honestly doesn't add much, except for which I won't give it away. But even though there isn't, again, there's no surprises in the film. It's just blatant foreshadowing. But James Corden, or sorry, Peter Rabbit, kind of winks at the camera, saying like, "Oh, I don't know, should we leave it here? There should be more." And I'm like, I think you should leave it here. A third one, I won't be like, oh no. I'll be like, I don't think a third one's necessary. I mean, like, what else can you really do with a third one? I think they should just leave it with the sequel. So yeah, it's nothing amazing or groundbreaking. It's just kind of dull and generic. But I enjoyed it more. The ideas and like what the film portrays and how it is portrayed and how different it is from the first film, I actually like more. And I wouldn't say it feels closer to Beatrix Potter, but it's a good enough attempt to tell a decent Peter Rabbit story. And it is slightly funnier too, I'll give it that as well. So yeah, there are things in this film that are better, but at the same time, that's really not saying much compared to what the first film did. Visuals. Once again, the first film, I thought it looked... Oh, hang on. Sorry. Like the first film, the visuals in the film look great. The animation on the animals still looks very convincing, and it is very well done. I like some of the new characters look quite cool. I like the look of Barnabas and how gruffy and old and big he is. And his gang is also quite interesting too. The film's well shot for the most part. I think it mostly takes place in London. And once again, it doesn't look as amazing as the Paddington movies, but it does look very pretty and it is choreographed quite well. Sometimes the camera work can look a bit off, like when Thomas McGregor rolls down. You've seen this in the trailer where you see like what seems to be a GoPro around him, and then when you see him bouncing down the hill, that is when I thought it just got a little bit cartoony, and some of the CGI a little bit can be a little bit obvious to tell, oh, that's not real. But the slapstick, and even when the animals interact with like real objects like a coat and a hat, there's a scene where they're like in a house and they're trying to escape with all these goodies, and then they disguise themselves like as someone with a hat and coat, like in those old cartoons. That's all done very well, and the film is actually really well made. I mean, as a film design, it just looks very basic, but it is very well made, and I like how it looks. Nothing bad I can say except for the CGI parts with the actors can look a bit but mostly it is a really well done looking film. I would happily take this look over Smurfs because it actually looks like a live action adaptation of the books, and it looks great. Not much else I can say. I'd say the first film looks more bright, but this one still looks very good to look at. Characters and acting. Peter Rabbit, honestly, not much has changed with him. The only change that I got from him is that he's not as selfish and annoying in the first film. In fact, he's not really, I guess you wouldn't call him the main character per se, because he isn't... There are other characters who do take up most of the screen time, like Thomas, who isn't quite as funny as he was in the first film, but he still gets some big laughs out of me. Bee is still the loving, wife of Thomas and the loving friend of the rabbits. Nigel Basil Jones, who is perfectly fine, is just the publisher who wants to sell merchandise, and yeah, you can kind of tell where it's going with him. Barnabas, who's actually my favourite character in the film, helps Peter around the streets and tell him how to be a better thief. He's actually really funny. He has some very funny lines, and a pretty solid performance, or voice performance, by Lenny James, which is a really surprising choice. Usually they get like a famous English actor, but he was in like Walking Dead and all that as well. If they got Idris Elba, I wouldn't be surprised, but he was legit great, and his character was interesting, and he was my favourite character in the entire film, really. Benjamin's just the supporting character. He gets a couple of funny lines, and he was kind of funny in the first film, I'll admit. The twins, they could have been. You could have put them in the background, or you could have left them at home. Wouldn't make much of a difference. They don't really seem to do much other than do that whole running joke where Flopsy's now called Lavatory. I don't know what the joke is. I actually don't get it. But, Cottontail is obsessed with sugar, so there's that. Mr. Todd, James Todd, who voices him? Stuart Alves, and I believe he's, I don't know, Scottish, I guess. He's worked on a lot of animated stuff. Okay, he's basically just exercising. Cool, but I still don't get why. I don't get why he's Scottish. Shouldn't he be like British, like in the first film? I don't know. Piglin Bland, Jeremy Frog, the goose, the deer. They're all back, and they don't play a big role. Slightly bigger, but not big. But they're just there. Hell, they even make fun of them. It's when Barnabas asks Peter, what do they do, and he says like, oh, they don't really do much. Some of them I wouldn't even trust. Like, again, I like when the film just kind of makes fun of itself. That's actually really fun. So, yeah. So, Peter Rabbit, like I said, he's not as annoying as he was in the first film. I tolerated him just a little bit here and then in the first film, but not by much. He hit some of the characters from the first film hasn't really changed all that much, really. But the acting is fun. James Corden, who, I cannot stand. This is one of the only performances that I can actually tolerate. You heard me, I actually didn't mind him in the first film, because they were making fun of him a little bit, and he did put on new funny material that isn't, like, groundbreaking, but funny enough. This and Smallfoot proves that he can be funny in his own way when it's not too obnoxious or anything like that. He's not super funny, but he's fine. I would have preferred someone else, but he's fine. He's fine here. Donald Gleason is still terrific as Thomas McGregor. He's still got funny lines and great movements. He's still a ton of fun. Rose Byrne is quite sweet, as always, as B. David Olayo, who I think is very miscast, and usually these family films come out roughly after, like, when one of the actors wins an Oscar or something, which in this case isn't the case, but he's good and charming, but could have picked someone else for this role. Everyone else, like Elizabeth Debicki and Margot Robbie and Lenny James, their voice performances are very good. Colin Moody, who voices Benjamin, is very good. Rupert Digges as well. Ewan Leslie as Piglin Bland. Damon Harriman as Tom Kitten. And other people who I cannot remember. Oh yeah, Hayley Atwell as Mittens. That is a really interesting choice, because I never thought of her as a voice actress, and she is kind of well known in a way for being in these in stuff like this. So that's a nice surprise. So the characters are tolerable enough. They're not awful or well written. They're just basically written. They're just very ordinary in terms of characters, but personality and fun-wise, they're fine. They're not interesting or amazing, but they can keep your attention at least, and the voice acting is pretty top-notch, I suppose. So, yeah, they're fine. They're perfectly fine, with the exception of Barnabas, who is my favourite character in the film, and I did quite enjoy him. And Andy's gang too, Tom Kittens and all that, they're actually my favourite part of the entire film, favourite characters. the rest are just fine. They're perfectly watchable and just fine. Dominic Lewis reprises his composing here, and his score is equally as amazing as the first film. I don't know why. His score has good uniqueness to it, and I think... Well, it's not on iTunes yet. His music isn't up on iTunes, but as soon as it is, I will happily buy a couple. Because his music is really good, especially in these two films. I never thought I'd say this, but this was actually kind of a fun movie. Yeah. Yeah, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually liked Peter Rabbit 2. Okay, I don't love it. It's no Paddington or Paddington 2, but to its credit, it is kind of on the right track. I think the filmmakers saw how poor the first film did and how people didn't like it that much. They're like, you know what? Let's have some fun. And they did. And yeah, it was decent. Peter Rabbit 2 is better than it had any right to be. Oh, I mean, a little better. It's not amazingly better, but an improvement on the first film. The humour's better. The film is a lot more aware of its silly humour and environment. The third act is actually when the film gets more interesting and more fun. It still visually captures the look of Beatrix Potter's world, and it is still well made. Good production, good CGI. The characters are perfectly serviceable. They're passable. The voice acting is pretty great. The music is nice to listen to. There are some creative slapstick, I will admit, as well. However, the thing that does keep this film back from being anything above good is that it's too predictably familiar. The twist in the film is blatantly obvious. Visually, the film has a bit of effects issues, and the budget looks a little lower than the first film, and the characters that were previously in the first film don't do much except just come in and say a couple of lines, and that's it. It's a sequel that you might have seen before in terms of like similarities, but it's a pretty decent film. The first film was mediocre and annoying, but this one actually wasn't. Okay, maybe a little bit, but not as much as the first film. So yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. Well, mainly because it was good to go back to the cinema after what's going on. If it wasn't for that, I think this film would have been just slightly above the first film. I'm going to give this a 6.6 out of 10. Like, this was actually a good movie. Well, a decent movie. A good movie would be like close to a 7, and this film isn't as good as the Angry Birds movie 2, but this was an improvement over the first film. And I mean, it's no Paddington 2, no Paddington, but it's on the right track. I'd happily take this over the Smurfs 2 any day. Smurfs 1 and 2, to be more precise. If it wasn't for COVID, I think this would have been like a 6.2, but thanks to COVID, it's higher. So there you go, Peter Rabbit 2. Wow, I never thought I'd actually enjoy it. The first film I did, but since the film didn't make that much sense, and James Corden was annoying, I couldn't really get into it that much. But the sequel, I kind of did actually. I didn't follow the logic too well, but you know what? It's still a ton of fun. Yeah, I was surprised. It's not going to change anything. It's not life-changing, but I liked it. It was perfectly watchable. Decent fun. Wow. So, yeah. I don't think the film comes out in America until I think June 17th. I'll have a look. Let me have a look. It was originally supposed to come out last year in March, but obviously we know what happened, so yeah. United States. 18th of June. Sorry, I apologise. So the Americans will have to wait for that. I'm afraid. So tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about a underrated animated film and 2 more on Wednesday and Friday. And then on Saturday, I'll be doing Cruella. And the week after that, I'm going to do some more. I'm going to do some requests. And Quiet Place Part 2, which I'm really excited about. Anyways, so if you have seen Peter Rabbit 2 or Peter Rabbit 2 The Runaway, seriously, why is it called that? Is it good, bad, decent? Do you want to see it? Let me know below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. And until next time, thank God they removed that shitty, he wears a blue jacket and no pants. Well, obviously he's a rabbit, and none of the animals in both films wear pants. Oh, by the way, did you notice that these 2 films are directed by an American? How do I know? Because the first film only uses the word but, truck, and in this one they say bathroom, not toilet or anything. If this was actually directed by someone who isn't American and is British, then they could have used like, go to the loo or something like that. Lavatory, bath. I'm not a big fan of when it comes to American directors directing British films. Sometimes they can work out fine, but mostly not really. But I'm glad they removed the no pants line. It should have been no trousers, because that's more British than no pants. But anyways, I'm glad they removed that, because he doesn't have pants. I know that, but why am I still talking about this? Oh yeah, they removed the line from the second film. Doesn't make much of a difference, but it's neat.